Hello and welcome to another video. Today we're going to be talking about making plans and everything that goes with that. So first off, how general should plans be? Should it be a plan to win, a plan for laning, a plan for ideal clicks, or what should we even be planning for? So I think there are two types of plans: the plans we make or find before the game, and the plans we need to come up with as we go. So we want to evaluate the position we are in and figure out what our ideas are. Get rid of every bad idea, then try to figure out what the enemy will respond with, which will eventually leave us with one or a few good ideas. So this would mean that you would think about the plays and then filter them out, right? We then pick one we evaluate as a highly probable to work with a satisfactory return idea. A plan could then be setting up a play through pushing a wave or transitioning that into priority, which could give you control over a quadrant of the map and perhaps let you make a play. So that would be a long-term positional strategy-based plan, or a plan could just be to come back to lane and use your item advantage to all in, or it could also be 3-manning the 1k shutdown guy and trying to collect the bounty. They can be going really far into the future, or they can just be a pretty short-term plan. Obviously, you will sometimes find responses which are surprising by your opponents, which will force you to recalibrate your decisions and eventually find a better way of sorting your plans until you become as accurate as possible with sorting the good from the bad. This is improvement in League, and this is why practice is very important and what kind of practice you get. Because if you don't actually make plans, then you don't evaluate your plans. And if you don't look at what went wrong in your plans, then your plans will never improve, even if you do make them. So something like mental checklists can help you a lot. So here you would layer by priority in terms of invades, ganks, dives, crashes, all-ins, waves, forcing the enemy to go somewhere, and so on and so forth. These can be a pretty good idea, because with these we can run through the most forced sequences and only spend time on branching ideas after we have already gone through them. So good players run through the forced sequences very easily, and then they arrive at the ones that have multiple endings. So, right here, for example, we have Vitality Bow just killing these two bot laners. And after this, there's a forced sequence, right? Because when we crash this wave, then the wave will come back. And that's an example of a forced sequence where the enemy can't do anything. And we actually have some kind of control, right? Over something. This is just something that we're controlling, and that's it, really. But forced sequences can be pretty different in nature. For example, a forced sequence can also be us having level 6 before the enemy because of an early game lead, and then us being able to level 6 invade, and the enemy can't do anything about it. That can also be an example. Or it can also be we have a huge wave stacking, the enemy can't answer, and we can just dive. Or whatever else it may be. A big point here is that normally there will be very fundamental reasons why your opponent can stop you in your plans. So if we can learn these fundamentals, then we can eventually filter the plans out very quickly. And important to note is that both in reviews and in-game, you want to prove yourself wrong. Not right, but wrong. If you can prove yourself wrong, you either learned something or you were right. And that's very important, because it's not the same to try to prove yourself right and then prove yourself right, and try to prove yourself wrong, and then prove yourself right. Those are very different things. If you try to prove yourself right, it's very simple to delude yourself. You can just believe, but that would work in a different game, or a different elo, or maybe like, if this guy played like this, or if I did this, or something like blah, blah, blah. Doesn't fucking matter. Those are pretty bad mentalities. I fall into them pretty often myself, because they're just human nature. Human mind tries to find the easiest way to do stuff and the easiest solutions, and eventually you will end up defaulting to something like that if you don't keep track of what you're doing. Because it's just a lot easier to try to prove yourself right than this to try to prove yourself wrong. A person who does this a lot is Nice. He will go into replays and he will just try to prove why he is right. So you want to also have a plan which will span into the enemy's last move after the plan. So if you were to invade with a level 6 advantage, and you want to figure out what your enemy will do right after that invade and during it, right? So you want to have a plan which reaches what the enemy will do at the end of your plan. Because then you can find sequences where the enemy can't do anything after your plan, and sequences where maybe your plan is good, but maybe the enemy has an option after it, you know? Stuff like that. Small stuff, but it matters. Then, as a side note, I will say that if you ever find yourself inside of a game with nothing you can do, so you think that there are no plans available, nothing you can do, you just need to AFK and do nothing, it's highly likely that the issue is something along the lines of you doing something wrong before, you missing out on something that could give you enough power to play now, for example, missing too many minions, so you get too bad items, so you don't have the damage to trade or whatever it may be. Your draft might suck, you picked good plans but not better plans, so you picked a winning move but you didn't pick a hard winning move. Maybe there was a move that gives you an advantage, but maybe there was a move that just wins you the game, right? And so on. There can be quite a few reasons, and you have to find a lot of those yourself, and eventually you'll figure them out. You shouldn't rely though on making plans too early or too late, because there are always things that you will have to learn just to save time. For example, openings or end games, something like that. So how you would say an opening would look in League would be something like how you open laning or how you open your jungle path, and an end game would be how you deal with late game stuff, Baron, end the game, and so on. This is stuff that you want to already have somewhat figured out at least, because otherwise it can lead to disaster. Because you're gonna have too much to think about, you're not gonna do it in time, and it's just not gonna work out well. Okay, so for our next note, should our plans be more passive or more aggressive? Is probably a common question. So playing in a passive way is going to be pretty consistent and decent, but the issue is that you will always lose value or tempo or something else, because if you're playing safer, that means you're pretty reactive and you're allowing enemy to do something. So this means that if you aren't skill gapping the enemy by a decent amount, it might end up backfiring because the enemy needs to make mistakes. The enemy usually does make mistakes, but if the enemy plays well enough, then you won't really have much you can do. So that is something to keep in mind, right? But if we look at concrete examples of this, for example here, in Bo's game, we have some pretty simple examples, right? So this is his opening. So he decides, do I want to clear one camp and go invade? Do I want to 3 camp, 4 camp, 5 camp, 6 camp, whatever, right? So he chooses an opening like this. Openings are something different from these exact plans, and I mean, they're a part of the stable plans that stay every game, but you have to figure those out slowly. But then he has to vary from the plan, so he makes a new plan. Okay, he saw that his bot lane dies in many games like these, right? Where the fight starts and, oh, something happens, so I need to respond to this. So this is an example of a reactive plan, right? So we do our stuff and then we see something is happening and maybe we go there. That's reactive. And then we adapt from whatever we were doing and we see, oh, okay, so new plan. Punish this guy. This is also a reactive plan. And then this is a more proactive plan, right? So after we get this guy, we could just back off and default to what we were doing, but we can also be more proactive. We can now try to punish the enemy for having a disadvantage. And that's what we do. So he tries to punish the enemy. He does. He gets a kill, whatever. And then after this, he does like whatever he does. And now he has a full item, right? And because he has a full item, his game is very different than otherwise. So right now, he does a lot more damage to camps, for example, right? So an idea can be to just clear all of your camps, because you will actually kill the camps really quickly. An idea can be to fight the enemy, or an idea can be something completely different and unrelated. But if we look, his top laner is recalling, his mid laner is pushing out, and everyone in the enemy team is playing bot side. So what are we really gonna do? Are we going to solo invade enemy Gromp when our solo laners are in base? Well, probably not, right? So okay, default plan is fine. As you can see that he clears the camps pretty quickly because he has a lot of damage, because item is done. But then we will just slowly go on with our plan, and eventually we will find a plan where we can have some kind of a new advantage. So we already have an advantage, right, from something that we kind of flipped a little bit, right? Like we can say that the bot lane gank is a bit flipped, we can say that the invade thing is a bit flipped, or whatever. You can say that those things are a bit flipped, but now we have an advantage. So now we can play more consistent, and since we take lower risks, we are unlikely to get so punished. But since we're ahead, us being a stronger champion means that taking lower risks can still give us pretty high returns. So then he does some stuff. He looks for counter to invade with his mid lane or whatever, and then he finds the enemy support. Okay, cool. Okay, clear. Get ahead more. Cool. Right? But then we're just looking. Where can we find a good play? Okay, so we found the enemy jungler. Can we find some kind of a fight, right? Is the question. Because we're really strong. So a fight is just great, but it needs to be a good fight. We found it, and now we can just abuse her for the rest of the game. We just take whatever we want. Do what we want. Cool. And now every fight we take is going to be really good for us, as long as we don't completely end it. He finds like some kind of a fight, and great. But this is enabled by something he did before. So we have our default plans, and we have the plans that change every game. So the default plans were something like clears, and the idea is like, okay, well, we're ahead, so clearing the camps can be pretty easy, and whatever else. While the plans that change every game are, for example, invades that are possible, or fights, or using leads, or whatever else, right? And that's how we make plans where we're both adaptable and yet consistent. Because in this game, we could go full cycle and just, yeah, I will invade the enemy Evelyn 20 times and fight her and everything. But why do that, right? Just look at the way the game is going. You ask yourself, well, do I need to do that? Not really. I can play in a different way. Right? At some point you find that through you being so strong, you get to do whatever you want for so long that the advantages keep on compounding and eventually you win. But this is an example of a game where you're ahead. So what do we do with plans when we're behind? So when we're behind, what we want to do is to figure out plans that counter enemy plans mostly and set traps. So what we do here is we pose the enemy a question. So say that we're the enemy team here instead of the Graves. We try to pose the Graves or his teammates a question where there are multiple answers, and some of them are good and some of them are bad. And then we try to get the enemy to pick a bad answer. That's an example of a plan in that scenario. So, for example, we could say something like, okay, well, we're going to set up a trap at, I don't know, like our red buff when it spawns, let's say, or his red buff when it spawns, and then we're gonna pressure bot lane, and then maybe, oh, will they answer bot lane pressure properly? Will they answer the invade properly? Will they answer this and that? And maybe the enemy can blunder. But at the end of the day, League is a very similar game to something like chess. Because in League, you have a lot of the same concepts as in those games. In League, you sort of have moves, you sort of have time, you sort of have turns, you sort of have, let's say, pins, tactics. You can also name, I don't know, game plans, pressure, sides of the map that you play on, and so on. If you think about it, those games are actually quite similar, but you have to figure out the connection between them. And that connection exists between a lot of the stuff that you experience in real life, and League. So if you think about whatever hobby you might have or interpersonal relationships or whatever, you can relate most of it to the game, because at the end of the day, the logic stays pretty similar, why stuff works. So, for example, we can take the practice methods, or we can look at what we should look at. For example, in hunting, we want to strike when our prey is trying to hunt down its own prey, when it thinks it's winning or something. That could be like a good idea, right? And in League, there's also that. In something like fighting sports, we want to look at what the enemy is looking at, what they're doing, how they're communicating, what their intention is. In League, we also have that. So if you can find whatever it is that you're good at and whatever it is that you do and relate that to League somehow, that can also help you a lot. But other than that, you really just want to figure out a way to evaluate your plans and to make your practice good and to make it count. And that will eventually make you much better than all of those people who are like, I don't know, Diamond or Master or whatever they might be, who just do random stuff. You will for sure be better than them. Anyway, that wraps up this video. If you enjoyed it, then like and subscribe, and you can comment what you'd like to see next time. See ya.